Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the GSH Show. I'm your host, Mo, and here with me is Adeline and Martin.
How's it going?
Hello, Martin. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Thanks for joining us today. We've been talking a bit and trying to get a hold of you to maybe have this discussion. I think you have a lot of interesting points for our community and people all around the world who are in the process of interviewing. And I think we'd be able to have some productive discussions around that today.
I'm excited to get into it.
Yes, let's do that. Before we get into the topics that we want to cover, I'd like to give a quick intro on Martin. He is the lead coach and founder of Career Therapy, as well as a career coach with the Muse. He's partnered with many educational organizations like Udacity and General Assembly, where he shares his knowledge, experience, and all his career advice. You can find him live streaming every day on LinkedIn, YouTube, and probably other channels, discussing all kinds of topics related to job search, knowing what you're worth, for example, job search productivity, what to ask at the end of an interview, and even some live coaching session. We'll include a link wherever you're getting this episode where you can get access to work that Martin's doing around this and hopefully get some benefits there. Martin, we're so happy to have you with us. How's everything going at your end?
Things are going great. Just lots of student calls today and helping people get jobs. So excited to chat with you and dig into it.
Amazing. So, Martin, let's get started. So I think the main starting point is going to be around soft skills, of course. That's kind of the topic that is pretty important for us. How do you think soft skills help an IT professional, tech worker, engineer, different names, different positions? How does it help someone get a job they're looking for? Do you think soft skills are becoming as important as technical skills?
Oh, yeah. Happy to get into this. I work with a lot of, machine learning people, data scientists, UXers, all across the board, from even sales to, the highly technical. And what I find is so interesting is across the board how important our relationships and our soft skills are in order to build a career, not just to get the next job, but to continue getting jobs throughout your career. I actually had someone once who said, "Is it possible to get a job without talking to anyone?" And I was like, well, you're talking to me, so I'm going to go with a no on that. But if you want to figure it out, it's up to you to figure it out. So, the soft skills are incredibly important. But what's nice about the world today is that there are far more ways to connect with people than there were in the past. I always like to tell the story about when my grandpa came to America. He just walked up to a construction wall with a bag of tools and said, "Do you need help, putting this wall up?" and eventually became foreman of that company. In our current modern age, we have 20 layers of things between us and that person. We've got LinkedIn profiles and cover letters and resumes and Indeed profiles and Glassdoor. It gets a little bit overwhelming, right? And so what I like to do with folks is hack that system. Instead of trying to throw pebbles at a brick wall for a year, hoping that you're going to chip away enough sand to get through, climb over the wall and talk to someone. And if you can build a direct relationship, you can get a job. 80% of jobs are found through those social connections that we make. And I think being able to talk about yourself, sell yourself, and communicate in a really strong way is incredibly important, especially because most people who are trying to find a job are coming from the perspective of, can you help me solve my problem of not having a job versus can I help you solve your problem with these skills? And I think that shift really takes us away from the hard skills into the soft skills and the sales side of things.
Amazing. And is there a pattern you see here, like maybe what kind of candidates experience this more? Do you see this more in junior candidates, senior candidates, or you don't really see a difference and it's kind of the same problem for everyone?
It is interesting across the board. And honestly, I will say I probably have a skewed demographic of everyone I talk to is struggling in the job search in some way, shape, or form. So in that respect, everyone I'm working with is struggling with this in some shape or form. But I would say that folks who have it the hardest are those who are trying to go from one career to a completely different career. People who are musicians who are trying to be developers, people who are artists trying to become UX designers, That jump, I think, causes people to want to ignore their past and try and start fresh. But then when you start fresh, you're like, I've got that imposter syndrome. I don't know if they say they want 3 years experience, but I just started learning this thing. How do I talk about that? And even if you can technically get the job done, if you don't have the confidence in yourself to be able to do it and the confidence in yourself to be able to talk about it, then we can't instill that confidence in others. And that's really, I think, the main thing here is like, we don't want to ignore our history. We don't want to let go of the past. We want to incorporate it and utilize it as like fuel to bring a confident mindset to that conversation. And this is one big thing about social skills. A huge percentage isn't even the words you're saying. It's how you're saying those words. So you could be saying all the correct words, but doing it with a really like, kicking my foot kind of a tone, and
Yep.
and it won't come through very well.
Interesting. Do you see a certain weakness that you feel probably most of the people you talk to have, or an area where everyone seems to be troubled? Either they notice it or they don't. Is there anything that kind of immediately comes to mind for you?
Yeah, the thing that immediately comes to mind in that respect is the focus on what is missing. We spend so
Interesting.
much time saying, the job listing said I need all these things, and I don't have, gosh forbid, I don't have one of them, so I can't apply, right? When in reality, we only need 60% of what's in that job listing to give it a shot. Um, or I showed my portfolio to someone and they told me that I was missing this. Then I showed it to someone else and they told me I was missing this, and then someone else and this and this and this. And then all of a sudden I've got a list that's going to take 4 years to do something with, right? And I
Right.
think we focus so much on where we're deficient, we forget that literally just being able to show up to work on time, do the tasks in front of you, and not create interpersonal problems is like 60 to 80% of what we need to do a good job. There's a pretty funny quote that my dad would always say when I was younger, which is, it doesn't take much to be better than the person next to you. Whereas what we're thinking is we have to be the best person on earth to even qualify for the most basic roles.
Right. Really interesting. And I see you have a lot of great lessons learned from your father. I'd be curious to know about your story. What was your path? How did you end up becoming interested in this anyway? I think we didn't. We should have touched on that earlier, but I think it's a pretty interesting story for me, actually.
Absolutely. I'm happy to go into it. Yeah, so I come from a big family, a lot of, engineers and lawyers and things like that. So I'm definitely a little bit the odd one out. But I went to school for marketing pretty much because I wanted to be an artist of some sort, a creative of some sort. And that was the most business focused version of it. And
Hmm.
also, I was really interested in human psychology. I thought that and behavioral psychology. I wanted to know how commercials convinced me to buy things that I previously didn't even know existed. And so I dove into that world and I worked in marketing at Fortune 500 companies, and I worked at agencies in Chicago and really got to understand how these companies utilize communication in order to convince us to give them our money. And it's a pretty straightforward thing. It's actually almost mathematical to a degree, with a lot of art in the science. But I think what is so interesting about, working at credit card companies and things like that is I can see, well, okay, it's very clear how they can get our money. How can we get theirs? That was the question I started asking myself. I'm like, if I want to get a new job, I have to convince them to pay me money. Okay, how do I do that? And, I thankfully took some graphic design classes and things. I knew how to make things look good, how to make things consistent, how to build a brand. And then I started helping my friends with that. And so I got into coaching through personal branding and helping people with elevator pitches, building networking events on the side of work. And that just continued to grow until I eventually got involved with the Muse as a coach. And then once I became a coach, it was just an inevitable fall out of the marketing world and into the education space, and working to help these job seekers reverse engineer marketing tactics in order to get companies money instead of spending all their money at the company. They, get a little bit of that back. Why not?
I really like that. I really like your analogy there, and how you're kind of reverse engineering the process. That makes a lot of sense to me. And in essence, it is exactly what a job search is. So
And it's a lot of fun. Like that's what's, I think we look at the job search with so much anxiety and fear, which
mhm.
fair enough, rejection is terrible and it's hard to deal with. But if we can push through that, we can get to the fun part, the amusing parts of rejection, which I know probably sounds like an oxymoron, but it is a pretty interesting place to get.
Wow. Okay, that's super interesting for me. What would be like an exercise to do that? That's super interesting. So you would take something that is very negative, very personal to everyone. I've been rejected a lot. Everyone has been,
Mm-hmm.
and it does not feel good.
Mm-mm.
I can't imagine how you could make it feel good. That's really interesting for me. So, do you have an exercise? Do you have a guideline?
Yeah.
What would you recommend someone?
Well, I'll tell you the exercise I did, though I would not necessarily recommend it. And then I'll give some more easy ones to practice. But what I did was I got to the point where I used to, I've struggled with anxiety my whole life, and it's one of the reasons I changed careers so much early on, and it's also a reason why I'm so curious about this, like career hopping, job hopping world, and how to help people through that. But early on, I was so scared I couldn't even send like an email to someone. I would literally be sitting there and my friend would hit enter on the computer for me to send that networking email. And then I would choke up in the one-on-one conversation and like struggle to get my pitch out. So I realized that I was pretty far behind where other people that I knew were, and I needed to do something about it. So I just went hard and did like back-to-back networking, just trying to really do exposure therapy to a degree and do it so much that it became normal and have so many failures that it became normal. And I went all the way to the extreme of I've gone on interviews to purposely bomb them just to see how bad it could go. And this one time I applied to a random marketing role. I didn't read it. I didn't look at it. I knew nothing about it. They accepted my application and invited me in for an interview. I said yes again without looking at anything, only to realize that it was nowhere near me. I had to take a train to the suburbs, borrow a suit, borrow a car, drive 40 minutes to this place, sit down, walk in the room, unprepared, didn't look at a single thing. And they said, "All right, well, tell us about yourself." And I gave them my spiel about who I am, and they're like, "Wow, that has nothing to do with what we do here." I was like, "Well, what do you do here?" And they're like, "Well, this is what we do." And it was some sort of like marketing thing in stores and stuff like that. And I was
Mhm.
like, "Well," and it was just that weird silence. And I was like, I guess you know where to find me if you ever want to chat again." And they're like, "Yeah, I guess this isn't a fit." And I got back in the car, drove it back, dropped the car off, took the train back to the city and sat down and went, "Well, I don't think it's going to get much worse than that. So now I can go really apply for jobs." And I think once we start, realizing that literally the worst possible thing that can happen is someone just doesn't want us in the room anymore, and we
Mhm.
go and move on to the next thing, everything gets a little bit easier and a little bit lighter. And honestly, none of this stuff is personal. What I've learned through all these experiences is that most of the times when we're being ghosted or ignored or getting a curt rejection or whatever the thing might be, it's
Mhm.
usually because the other person is stressed out. The other person has their hands tied by a legal team. The other person has been outvoted by their senior players. The other person is, struggling with whatever they're struggling with. I had someone ghost me for a month, and then I found out later when I worked with them that they had an anxiety disorder. And I'd been trying to talk with one client that I'm trying to land, and they just got back to me yesterday and said, "Hey, sorry I've disappeared for 2 months. Would you still want to keep chatting?" And I think realizing that just because 3 days have gone by and you haven't heard back
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they hate you. It just means that they're probably busy and we should be more empathetic.
I like that. I like that. And probably from my personal philosophy, I would add it doesn't even matter if they hate you, right?
Yeah,
For whatever
100%.
reason, that you might not be a click for them. They just might not like the type of work you do, or maybe even your personality might not be a fit for their environment. But I think
Exactly.
that's fine. It's absolutely fine, and I think you shouldn't be working in an environment that is like that anyway. So that's a
Right.
great thing. I celebrate that.
And realize
Amazing.
that there's people that we don't like and they
Yes.
probably never did anything to us, but we just ignore them. People aren't actively trying to destroy you. They're just at most going to ignore you, and being ignored is fine.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. Great. I mean, right up until now, even if we stop right now, I feel like we've learned a lot. I have, and I'm sure a lot of these points will resonate with most of our audience. And I think it's a difficult mindset to adopt, especially when you're deep in the trenches of the job hunt, and it's difficult to really practice it. But I think knowing that someone like yourself has done that and has helped other people do the same, I think is confidence inspiring. And I hope checking out your content will help people get into that, and I'm sure they would benefit from it. Amazing. There's a bunch of content that we need to, like, topics that we need to cover.
Yeah.
Maybe let's go back a little bit into the basics. What is the purpose of an interview? And probably more specifically in this case, we're talking about, what we call behavioral questions, or kind of the type of questions that most people are afraid of. What are they about? And what should candidates think about, or what are recruiters usually looking for in a response?
Absolutely. And I think, it always changes depending on who's in the room, right? If you're talking to a recruiter or a screener, or you're talking to the hiring manager or the CEO, there will be slight differences in each of those conversations and what they want to hear. However, the one thing that is fairly consistent throughout is that the question they're asking you, the literal words that they're asking you, there's a second question behind that question. So a good example of that would be the tell me about yourself question. When someone says, tell me about yourself, almost every single person I've ever talked to, myself included, freezes up and goes, I have no idea what they want me to say. But they literally asked me, and it's not even a question, but they literally said, tell me about yourself. Okay, I was born in 1988 in Arlington Heights, blah, 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 blah. This person has fallen asleep, and we've just started our interview with, like, literally think if you went to a movie and they started by saying, Clark Kent was born on this date. It's like, no, that's not how Superman movies start, right? We need to give them what they need to know first, and then tell them, the other details of our work life and things like that. So what they're really asking you when they say, tell me about yourself, is most likely, because most people are not trained interviewers, they're saying, I Googled a list of interview questions, and the first question on the list is tell me about yourself. And I don't know how to start this conversation. Would you mind starting it for me?
Wow. Okay. Let's stop there. That's really interesting. So first of all, you're giving us insight into what goes into the mind of a recruiter, and their anxieties, their fears, which we also spoke about before, but you're also saying that they're expecting us to lead the conversation, and this is an opportunity. I assume. How would you take that opportunity? What would you do with it, and what do you think would be the right information to put first when you're talking about yourself?
Absolutely. So yes, it is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to set a tone. So if you set the tone of, I'm going to ramble for the next 10 minutes, that's a long tone. If you set the tone of, I'm going to give you like 2 bits of information and then just stop, that's also the wrong tone. So what we want to say is, what tone do I want to set? I want to set a tone of confidence, that I know why I'm in this room and that I'm curious about what they need help with. Remember, the job search and the interview process isn't about impressing people. It's about convincing them that you can solve problems. You don't have to be the best. You just have to be able to solve the problem. And so if you can clearly communicate their problem and show how you can solve it, you're in an amazing spot. The simplest way to do this is something called the present, past, future setup of an answer to this question. So I start with the present. What problems am I currently solving, and for who? So I'm a career coach. I work with education organizations. I would start by saying, well, I'm a career coach and I work with education organizations in order to improve their student outcomes through career coaching. That's what I'm currently doing today. It's focused on their outcomes, my skills that help them with their outcomes. So let's say you were in data science. I am a data science engineer helping companies sort their data and put it to use to improve their products and services. That's
Right.
what I'm currently doing today.
Hmm. Okay.
And then we go into the past. How did I get here? Well, personally, my background in marketing and interest in behavioral science and human behavior is what got me interested in these topics. And then I tell a little bit about, what I did at the beginning of this chat. I'm using these skills as well,
Hmm.
talking about how marketing led me to this role. And that's the present now matched with the past. So most people start with the past first. We're not giving context when we start with the past. We're saying, in my first job, I did this and it's unrelated to anything that we're talking about so far. So you don't really care. Versus, here's what I do to help you. Now let's go to the past so that you can understand why I do these things. And now we're going to look at the future. And the future is how I'm going to help your business. So here's what I do and the people that I help. Here's what happened in the past and what I learned that got me here. And I'm super excited to learn more about the problems that your company is facing from a data science perspective and how I can bring value to the team. What sort of things are you looking to solve with this role?
Right. And what is the worst way to respond to this question?
Oh man, there's probably 100. The most boring way is to just say, I was born here, I went to school here. Unless they went to the same school as you, they're not going to know what to say.
Hmm.
Um, and then give them just a litany of all the roles that you had. If you literally just read your resume, you're like,
Right.
my first job was in this. I left it. I then went to this. It's the and then statements. I did this and then I did this and then I did this and then we need to say I did this and learned this, which led me to make this decision, which is why I'm here today. We need to connect the stories. So even if you are going to do linear past to present, at least explain the learnings between what I like to call each phase of your career. In phase one of my career, I worked in marketing, and that taught me that I really love human behavior, but it also showed me that I really crave that immediate feedback loop, which is why I went into coaching so I could get more of that feedback loop. Instead of sending things out into the internet, I do one-on-ones. Same skill set, different approach, better outcomes led me here today. And that kind of a thing. So let's say your background is in biology and now you want to go into computer science. What was it about biology that you loved? What did you want more of? And why do you have more of that in computer science?
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I think this really helps people who are transitioning careers or moving between complete industries. I think this is very helpful, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. What about talking other classic questions like talking about your strengths, weaknesses?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe how should a candidate or interviewee approach that?
Yeah, I love this one. This one's the hardest one because we get filled with our own insecurities. We're told our whole lives not to brag, and we're told our whole lives to fix our weaknesses. So talking about our weaknesses makes us anxious, and talking about our strengths makes us self-conscious. And so what I like to do here is outsource it. If you have feedback from past managers, use it. My previous manager told me that I'm not so great with details, but I'm amazing at at dealing with people. That's my weakness. That's my strength. It's not going to change, even though I've mitigated all the real negative parts of my lack of attention to detail. But just don't expect me to be building like complex spreadsheets because I'm going to be focused on coaching people one on one. And why do we approach it this way? Why do we try and outsource it? Because it's not so much about what the answer is. Remember, they ask us a very specific literal question. If we give a literal answer, we're not doing it right. What they're
Mhm.
really asking behind this question is, are you self-aware? Have you sought out feedback throughout your career? And have you implemented the things that you've learned? So in this case, if I'm asked my strengths and weaknesses, they're saying, have you sought out, are you self-aware? So do you even know what you're saying? So anyone who says, well, I procrastinate, That's not really self-aware, because do you know anyone on earth who doesn't procrastinate? No, you don't. Everyone procrastinates at least in something in their life, right?
Yes.
And so then if you say, okay, well, I work too hard, does that show self awareness? Not really. Actually, it's showing that you're probably going to burn out. That's like a truly negative thing, unless you can talk about how you mitigate that. If you say, I'm prone to burnout, that is self aware, because then you can say, so what I need to do is practice like consistently good sleep hygiene in order to keep myself, healthy and on task. And I'll be able to talk to you and set up times with my manager to let you know what's happening, what the priorities are that I think you need done, and how I'm going to approach it, so that you can help me prioritize things and not burn out. And so you can start making it a conversation, right? So
Mhm.
again, they're trying to assess, are you self-aware? Have you sought out feedback from people? And have you responded to that feedback? And if you don't have managers, I would take a personality test. 16 Personalities has a free one, and they will literally give you a list of strengths and weaknesses. And you can go into an interview and say, well, according to the personality test that I took, it says that one of my weaknesses is this, and I agree with it. And here's an example, and here's how I've dealt with that. And that shows that you're seeking out feedback, you're self-aware, and you're improving yourself.
Very interesting. Is there a certain strength or weakness that you feel one should avoid
Hmm.
when you're in an interview? Like, are there certain qualities or negative qualities, if you would call them, that you shouldn't be talking about for whatever reason that maybe you've experienced and throughout your own interview experience or with candidates you've coached? Has there been anything that you just feel like there is no point in mentioning this? It doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't do you any good. Anything that comes to mind?
My mind is racing with a lot of different examples right now, and part of it is what you're saying, and part of it is how you're saying it.
Hmm.
So, for instance, if I say I procrastinate, it's just a whatever answer. If no one would ever say the opposite, then what you're saying is probably not that impactful, right? No one's going to say I'm not a hard worker. So saying my strength is that I'm a hard worker means nothing, right?
Yeah.
No
Hmm.
one's going to say I don't get along with people and can't work on a team. So saying that I'm really good with people and I work well on a team doesn't really say a whole lot.
Yeah.
The main thing is to have an example, a specific example to pair with your answer. So instead of just saying what the strength is, show it. So, you know, I'm someone who's not very detail oriented. If I just say I'm not detail oriented and I stop, you're going to be like, this person's going to mess up every single document we give him. But that's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in comparison to my other skills, being detail oriented is one of my lowest priorities. So I might have a misspelling in an email, but that's because I'm rushing to another call to help someone who's crying. And so it's all about balancing your strengths and weaknesses and bouncing them off each other and then giving examples. So a good example of that would be, I can't necessarily build your entire student tracking system to let you know where all of the people are, the 300 people are in their job search, but I could fill out your tracking system that you already have built by a seasoned developer and someone who understands data better than I do. And that's the conversation I want to have with them is, what do you need and where are my weaknesses not helping, or where are my weaknesses covered? And so I would stay away from anything that's super personal. Telling people that I have insomnia isn't really going to help in the interview. It doesn't show them how I do the job. It doesn't give insights into my ability to help them. And telling someone that I'm like working too hard, or trying to do that thing where you take a negative and spin it into a positive,
Yeah.
always just seems weird. I always feel like just balance it out instead of trying to spin it. It's like, I'm not great with data. I'm really good with people. What percentage of data do you need me to deal with? And what percentage of people do you need me to deal with? And hopefully we have a good fit.
Great. I love that approach. I think it answers a lot of questions for most people in terms of what they should and shouldn't say in this scenario. I'm sure everyone
And use
has.
those personality tests. Those, if you don't know what to say, they give you real good English language to use.
And you would be, to me, it feels a little bit awkward to say to someone, I took a personality test and this is what it said. You feel that it's something that you should be confident about and say, hey, I just took this personality test and they told me that I suck at this. So this is how I should be. This is what I'm doing to improve it, or kind of work around and try to balance that. But you
Yeah,
feel that it's Mhm.
I guess you don't have to quote the test, like say that
Okay.
you took a test. You could
Hmm.
just say, one of the pieces of feedback I've received in my career is that I'm someone who has difficulty speaking up in meetings. And what I do to mitigate that is I've joined Toastmasters and I've taken some improv classes in order to overcome my sort of fear of public speaking. And it's something that, it's a lifelong thing I'm working on, but it's just a piece that I'm constantly trying to develop because I'm more of a heads down technical person. I like to
Right.
come in, quietly get my work done and deliver results. And I'm also trying to keep an eye on that social piece so that I can speak up in meetings and let people know when I have something to say.
Great. Perfect. There's other areas that I think are also very common in interviews, and it's like talking about kind of the work you've done, projects that you've accomplished, or maybe products that you've built, whatever it is that you've been busy with. We've kind of come across a lot of different approaches to how to answer these questions. One is quite popular. It's called the STAR method. We also
Hmm.
recommend it to candidates as well. I'd love to know your take on it. Is it something that you would recommend? Do you have any other suggestions for how to approach talking about work experience, things that you've actually done?
Absolutely. I like the STAR method. It's something that I actually found, I like heard about it really early on and then probably copied it subconsciously and then came across it again. I was like, oh my gosh, I teach this. And then I was like, oh wait, I probably stole this. But yes, I think the STAR method is great. So STAR breaks out, and I'm sure the listeners know, but it's situation, task, action, result. Another way I would frame that is problem, approach, implementation, and outcome. The thing here is like you need to set up the story. If we just jump into the thing that we did without context, people weren't there with us. They don't know what we're talking about or who was in the room or what the scope was. So a good example of this would be something like, tell me about a time you had a struggle with a coworker. A lot of times people don't prepare for this and then they get really heated and they're like, oh my God, that one argument I had. And they just jump into like the middle of the argument they were having with someone, and I'm
Hmm.
sitting here as the interviewer going like, what are we talking about? You haven't even told me who you're talking to or what the situation was. I have no idea what this story is about. So when we start answering questions, we want to set up the situation. We want to say, the thing that we were trying to accomplish was blank. The problem we were trying to solve was blank. And the way that we were going to solve it, the task at hand was to create a website or was to develop a new customer service model or was to meet with the client and try and upsell them to an XYZ service, whatever the thing might be. That was the task. The actions that I took, let's say it's sales, I did cold calling, I did follow ups. The actions that I did, let's say it's data science, was I downloaded, the APIs and I did X, Y, and Z. And here's how I utilize them to come up with a solution. And then the final thing, the result, here's what the solution was. And I would even add to it, here's what I learned from it and how it can help your company. And that is just a great way to, if you think about the hero's journey or you think about the rising action, climax, falling action of storytelling, these are all really important ways to frame up a story. We all love movies. We know when movies are bad, and usually movies are bad when they just drag on or when they don't kind of lead us through the story with all the information we need.
Exactly. And as my wife would say, especially if the movie doesn't really make a point that's clear to you, she
Mm-hmm.
hates it. So I
Yeah.
completely understand. And it's all about, I guess, how you engage the person who's listening to you, right? I think most people, and I understand it because when you're in that position, it's difficult to see the interview beyond what it kind of looks like on the surface, which is
Mm-hmm.
someone sitting there and trying to analyze you and judge you based on so many different factors that just race into your mind. You're thinking every single detail that I do, the other person is picking up, which is not true.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not that attentive. And they miss out on a lot of signals in interviews. And this is amplified if it's like a phone interview or if it's like back to back. So there's lots of different reasons why people will not even notice most of the things that you're worried about. So I
Yeah.
think what's the most important thing, and what I've learned from what you're saying, actually, just kind of to recap on what I have picked up, is that you need to become really good at telling a story. You need to engage your audience right from the beginning, kind of go in with a punch, get their attention, and try to keep them engaged. Just try to make sense out of it, right? So for example, if you're talking about yourself, you want to put the point out there, a point that makes sense to them, resonates with them and their company, the mission or the product you're going to be working on, whatever it is, that is kind of right here in between you and this position. So you first want to establish that. Then you want to kind of build up a story that makes sense to them. They're like, oh, okay, this is why your history fits into this, and this is why you want to take your future maybe a few years and invest it into this. That's kind of what I've learned from you. Did I pick it up correctly? Or
Yeah,
am
I think that is a wonderful, like, that is exactly the goal. That's my goal in life. And I'm still not great at storytelling. I've been doing this for years. And I think I want to say yes to that, with the caveat that a lot of folks are like job seeking, like, I need a job next week. I'm not going to become the world's greatest storyteller overnight. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we can give ourselves a little bit of a break in the short term while still having that be the long-term goal of like being better and better at this every time we interview over the course of our lifetime. And I think the main thing that I would want to focus in on in that point is maybe, like, let's say we let go of being engaging. Let's just be structured. Let's just make sense. I would settle for someone who goes from rambling to making sense, who never makes it to like the world's most engaging speaker. I'd be
Right.
happy with you just going from disorganized to organized in your storytelling. And that would be a huge win. And really at the end of the day, we don't need to put on a show. We just need to explain the problems we can solve and how. And if they have those problems, they're going to want us to work there.
Brilliant. That is great advice. I like that. Simplifying the situation and trying to turn it into something that you can actually understand, digest when you're stressed and when you're trying to get results quickly. I love that.
A good way to do this, just to add
Mhm,
on to that, record yourself answering interview questions, download a list from the internet and just talk into your phone.
mhm.
Listen back to yourself and see how little sense your stories make.
Interesting.
It'll be shocking. Doing podcasts for years really showed me how disorganized my thinking was. And
Yeah.
subconsciously, I started figuring out how to do it better.
Yeah. Don't even get me started there. Like hearing my own voice is just really freaks me out most of the time.
Yeah, it's
But
crazy.
yeah, you get used to it, and you start self-correcting
Hmm.
after a while. My wife always says like you listen to yourself when you leave like WhatsApp messages. And I say I do that because I want to see how I'm sounding to the other person. Did I give the
Yes.
right message? It's an opportunity for me to kind of, because you never hear yourself, right? When you're thinking, because you're
Hmm.
simultaneously thinking and talking, you don't really digest what you've actually communicated. But
What you said
listening to
right there
something,
is the most important thing. You want to know how you're sounding to the other person, not how you're sounding to yourself, imagining whether or not you're being impressive to the other person. We need to be
right?
more objective. We need to say, like, literally, how do I sound? And hearing ourselves is the quickest way to that.
Amazing. There's so much to talk about, but we're short on time, and there's probably future sessions or other things that we want to do together, and we want to have time
Absolutely.
to dig deep into those. But I want to actually jump into before we kind of wrap up and go into final thoughts and recommendations. There was a question from our community, and I think kind of makes sense here because we're covering typical questions or kind of most important things to be prepared for. Someone asked, so he or she was given a question regarding what is the most frustrating task, problem, or project you have had to work on this past year. And what this person is trying to understand is, what is the recruiter trying to find out through this question? What kind of information should I be sharing? And, not messing it up, I guess, in the process. So how would you respond to that person, given this formula that you've given us?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things that they're asking in that question, right? So we'll break it down. So it was, what is a frustrating project you worked on in the last year? Was that the question?
Yes.
All right. Also, by the way, you can ask questions when you're asked questions. So that's a little in the moment. But they're saying, number one, have you worked on any projects in the past year? So
Mhm.
the answer is probably, hopefully, if we're continuing to learn. Although I do know some job seekers who have just done the job search and not worked on any personal projects. Huge mistake. You have
Mhm.
nothing to talk about in an interview. So the first thing is, have you worked on any projects? The second thing is, are you going to be honest with me about a struggle that you had? Or are you just going to say, all of my projects were perfect? The third thing is, what aspects of your work are you trying to develop? And so instead of focusing on the frustrating part, which is what it sounds like we should talk about with this question, literally, they're asking us about our frustrations. What we need to talk about is our learnings. So the problem with this question, and where the trap people fall into, is they go, a time I was frustrated, and they'd never thought about it before the interview. So now they're going through their, memory bank to find a frustration. An emotion pops up. Suddenly they get transported back to that emotion. And now the tone of the interview has changed from, I'm a helpful person here to solve your problems, to, I'm angry about this problem that I had a year ago. And this has happened to me when someone says, tell me about a struggle you've had with a coworker. And I just start talking about the most recent struggle I had, but it had never been resolved. And it's actually still a fresh wound. And all of
Hmm.
a sudden, like, the whole tone has shifted to this really horrible place. And so what we want to do is not focus on the frustration, focus on the thing we learned from doing that project. I had someone and they just wouldn't do any of the work that I was giving them. And it was frustrating to meet with them week over week and try and get them to, make progress, but they would always show up with their hands empty with no updates. What I ended up finding out is that their wife and was employed and they weren't, and they were totally fine with that, and they weren't actually looking for a job. And so what it taught me is that I need to do a better job upfront asking questions to figure out people's motivations or their lack of motivation. And then what I found out a month later is that his wife got pregnant, and then he was very motivated to get a job. And then he got a job in like a month and a half. So
Wow.
these are the kinds of things where it's like, what I learned from that situation isn't the frustration. What I learned from that situation is how much of coaching is outside of my control, but what I can do to get that information sooner so that I can adjust myself accordingly. And those are the kinds of things that we want to talk about, rather than, this person just wouldn't do what I wanted them to do. And you know how it goes. People just don't do it. Like, that's not a good answer.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Martin, I've enjoyed having this conversation,
Me as well.
and it's been great, and I definitely want to do it again. So I'll try to chase you down, get you on another call later.
I'd love to.
Um, but in the meantime, first I want to ask you, like, what would be kind of your final word of advice? Maybe something that you think is important for candidates. Maybe they're missing out on it, or something that a lot of people are making mistakes about, or they think you feel like is quite an important point, or maybe like one point that they should take away from this session. What would that be?
This is a funny one because it's come up quite a bit the last few months. For some reason, when we're deep in the emotions of the job search and struggling with all the ups and downs and everything, we forget that Google exists and that we can find the answer to pretty much anything that we're struggling with when it comes to the job search. There's a lot of stuff you have to sort through, but if you're like, well, what if they ask me this question? How should I answer it? There are likely 12 articles or more written about not only how to answer that question, but what they're actually asking, why they're asking it, and how to break it down. My videos included. And so I think that's a really interesting thing, is like, use the resources that are out there, because you're probably downloading the same list of questions that the interviewer panicked 5 minutes before the interview and downloaded themselves. And so if you download that list and you read that list of questions and practice them and come up with your 5 good answers that can answer a dozen questions. We don't need a new story for every question. We just need 5 good stories that will answer a dozen questions. You're going to be in a great spot. And so download that list, practice, record yourself, and you should be in a much better place than sitting down and waiting to be surprised by the next question they ask.
Amazing. And actually, on that point, we have put together a very short slide deck on just behavioral interview questions for everyone. We've been using it for a while, and we send it to most candidates before they go into interviews. At the last slide, I believe, there is a compilation of a bunch of these questions that we've seen come in interviews again and again. So if you need a place to look at quickly, you can get access to that. Adeline will probably include it somewhere in this link as well, and so you can take advantage of that. And
That's
speaking
wonderful.
of, thank you. Speaking of downloading or taking content, what kind of, and this is kind of the last thing I wanted to ask you was, what pieces of your content do you think candidates or interviewees should be looking at right now? What do you think would be really helpful if there was one or two pieces of content that they should look at today? Why do you think it's important for them? Or maybe it's a starting point for them?
Absolutely. So I do live videos every single morning on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I also do a podcast. But I think the live videos is probably where the best stuff is because it's more tactical. There are two live streams that I have up on my YouTube channel that are literally live coaching calls with two people who were recently laid off from their jobs. So those are something that I don't see very much online, to see other people getting coached. And I do think that you can learn a lot by hearing other people talk about their problems, as well as get a sense of like camaraderie, because, hey, we're all kind of in this together, going through the same things. You're not isolated, you're not alone. So I would recommend checking out the interview with Meg Murphy. And let's just start there. Start with the interview with the one-on-one coaching call with Meg Murphy and just hear how she thinks about things. I think she has a super positive attitude and she puts herself out there and she's going to get a job in no time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you or maybe access your content or your coaching, where's the best place to find you?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Martin McGovern, founder of Career Therapy. And I'm also on, YouTube, Instagram, all the different places, Patreon and all that good stuff. But hit me up on LinkedIn. Everything is there. Everything will be shared out there. That's where I spend the majority of my life.
Makes sense because that's where most people start searching for a job.
Exactly.
So good choice. Great. Well, thank you again, Martin. Thank you, Adeline, as well, for organizing this session. We've had a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we get a chance to do this again. Wish you all the best till the next time.
I hope so too. Thanks, Mo.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.